Blood remembers what the living forget. The crossbow bolt whistled through the fog like a prayer answered wrong. Kyle heard it before he saw it. That particular sound of metal splitting air, of intention made sharp. He had not moved in 17 years. 17 years of standing in the ruins of Blackstone Chapel, watching the world crumble into smaller and smaller versions of itself, waiting for a reason to care. The bolt found its mark in the beggar girl's shoulder. She did not scream. That was what stopped him. Not the shot itself, but her silence. Her name was Mara, though Cale did not know this yet. She was 23, hollow-eyed, with the kind of beauty that suffering carves into bone. She had been abandoned at birth, raised by sisters who beat mercy out of her, and had spent the last 3 winters trading her body for bread in the village below the chapel. The soldier, a knight named Aldrich, commissioned by the church to cleanse the lands of undesirables, had orders. Mara's knees buckled. Blood bloomed across her threadbare dress like a rose opening in darkness. Kyle moved. He had not crossed the chapel threshold in decades. The wood groaned beneath his feet, as if the building itself remembered him, remembered what he was. His shadow fell across the soldier before Aldrich could load another bolt. The knight stumbled backward, his crossbow falling like a broken promise. "Leave," Kyle said. His voice was not loud. It was the voice of someone who had already died and was simply reminding the living of the same inevitability. Aldrich ran. Mara tried to follow, her hand pressed against her wound. Blood seeped between her fingers. Warm blood, living blood. Kyle had not smelled human blood in so long that for a moment he forgot what hunger was. Then it crashed through him like a flood, and he remembered everything. The thirst, the shame, the mathematics of survival that demanded he consume what he loved. He caught her before she fell. "Do not," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. They were gray, like winter stone. "I've heard the stories. Please don't." "I am not what you think," he said, though it was a lie. He was exactly what she thought. A vampire, a monster, a creature kept alive by the blood of mortals. But something in her eyes, not fear, not pleading, but recognition, made him gentle. He lifted her, felt her weight like a question he had been waiting centuries to answer. "Why did you help me?" Mara asked. Kyle carried her into the chapel. Candles burned on the altar, though no one had lit them in his presence for 17 years. Their light caught in his eyes, and for a moment he looked almost human. "Because," he said, "I stopped believing in reasons long ago. And then you arrived." He laid her on the altar steps and tore cloth from his own coat to bind her wound. His hands, which had once held crowns and commanded armies, moved with the precision of a surgeon. The bolt had gone clean through. She would live. She would survive the night, and the night after, and all the nights that would follow. Kyle did not know he was choosing her the moment he chose mercy over hunger. Mara watched him work, her breathing slowing, her fear giving way to something else, curiosity, maybe, or the strange peace that comes when you expect death and receive tenderness instead. "What is your name?" she asked. "Kyle," he said. "I am what remains when kingdoms fall and faith dies. I am the king who chose blood over righteousness, and now I am the beggar of eternity." Outside, the fog deepened. The chapel bells did not ring. No one came to save her or damn her. There was only Cale, kneeling beside a girl who should have been dead, and the terrible understanding that love, the kind that saves and destroys in equal measure, had just begun. The wound on her shoulder would scar. The scar would become the first of many things that bound them together. Chapter 2. The scar becomes a geography. 3 nights passed. Mara did not leave the chapel. She could have. The doors were never locked, and Kyle made no move to keep her captive. But the village below held nothing but the soldiers who had tried to kill her, the sisters who had sold her, the men who had used her. The chapel, by contrast, held candlelight and the strange mercy of a creature who could have ended her life but chose instead to tend her fever. The infection came on the second night. Fire spread through her shoulder, consuming her from within. Cale sat beside her narrow bed, a cot he had dragged from some forgotten room, and watched her burn with the stillness of someone who had already felt all the suffering the world could offer. "You're going to die," she whispered, thrashing. "You'll drink me. That's what monsters do." "I have drunk enough," Kyle said. His voice was steady, ancient. "For 700 years I drank. I drank princes and peasants, mothers and children. I drank until blood became routine and hunger became philosophy. I drank because I was a king, and kings take what they need." He placed a cloth soaked in cool water against her burning forehead. "What changed?" Mara asked, her eyes half closed. "Nothing changed," he said. "I simply stopped drinking. I learned that thirst can be a form of prayer, that hunger can teach you something hunger cannot devour." The fever broke on the third dawn. Mara woke to find Cale sitting in the chapel's only window, watching the sun rise over the mist without flinching. The light caught him strangely, not burning him, as the legends promised, but illuminating him, showing the terrible beauty of his face. He was ageless in the way that only the sorrowful become ageless. His eyes held centuries. "You're not burning," she said. "The myths are kind to us," Kyle replied. "They give us dignity in our monstrosity. The truth is simpler. We burn slowly. We have learned to love the pain." Mara rose on unsteady legs and approached him. The scar on her shoulder had begun to form, a thin line of new flesh, marked and changed. She watched it in a piece of broken mirror Kyle had found for her. "It's ugly," she said. "It is a map," Kyle corrected. "It marks the place where you were supposed to die and chose to live instead. In the old languages of my people, such scars were called the writing of grace." She turned to face him. This close, she could see the damage in him, not visible to the eye, but somehow present anyway. A weight that lived in his shoulders, in the careful way he held his hands, in the gravity that seemed to bend around him like light around a stone. "Why are you telling me these things?" she asked. "Why not just let me go? Pretend this never happened?" Cale's answer came slowly, chosen from centuries of silence. "Because for the first time in 700 years, I am afraid of something other than my own hunger. I am afraid that if you leave, I will remember again what it means to choose damnation. And I am afraid that if you stay, I will condemn you to an eternity of watching me choose mercy over and over again, only to fail someday." Mara reached out and touched his face. Her hand was warm, the warmth of the living, the warmth of the present moment. Cale closed his eyes. "Then fail with me," she said. "At least I will not be forgotten." That night, Cale told her his story, how he had been a king in the Carpathian depths, 5 centuries before the church rose to power, how a woman had loved him and he had turned her to escape death, how that love had become a curse, and they had spent 200 years destroying each other until she faded into shadow and forgetting, how he had buried himself in the chapel, not in penance, but in the hope that someday someone would arrive who could teach him that blood need not always mean consumption. Mara listened and did not flee. Instead, she asked the question that would bind them forever. "If I asked you to turn me, to make me like you, would you?" Kyle's silence was longer than centuries. His answer, when it came, was in the form of a promise. "Only if you asked me to kill you first. Only if you understood that immortality is not life, but the knowledge that you will watch everyone you love die while you remain. I would not curse you with this, not even for love." "And if I wanted to curse myself?" Mara asked. Kyle did not answer. Instead, he took her hand and led her to the chapel's altar, where candles burned like tiny eternities. And in their light, he showed her the only magic he still possessed. the ability to love without consuming, to hold beauty without destroying it. It would not last. Nothing ever does. But for now, in the fog and the candlelight, with her scar bearing the mark of resurrection, they were both free, not from suffering, but from the lie that suffering must be endured alone. Chapter 3. The Visitor in the Dark. On the 7th night, someone else came to the chapel. He arrived as a shadow first, a presence felt rather than seen. Mara sensed him before Cale did. She woke suddenly, her breathing sharp, that animal instinct that the dying develop still alive in her blood. Something ancient was approaching, something that made even the chapel's candles hesitate in their burning. Cale rose like a man from sleep, though he had not been sleeping. His face changed, hardened into something that suggested muscle and memory beneath the skin. "Stay behind me," he said. The door did not open. The visitor simply appeared, as if he had always been standing in the shadows, waiting for them to finally notice. He was tall, with the kind of beauty that suggests cruelty, the beauty of a blade or a storm. His eyes were red, not with hunger, but with something that predated hunger, something that might have been anger or pain, or the terrible clarity that comes from being alive too long. "Kyle," the visitor said, his voice like wind through a graveyard. "Still playing with mortals, I see. Still clinging to this farce of redemption." "Dimitri," Kyle replied. There was no surprise in his voice, only the weight of old names in old mouths. "I wondered when you would find me." Dimitri was Kyle's maker, the ancient vampire who had turned him 7 centuries ago, who had taught him that blood was currency and death was the only honest commerce. Dimitri was to Kyle what guilt is to the living, inescapable, eternal, the evidence of original sin. "The council grows restless," Dimitri said, his gaze moving to Mara. He looked at her the way a merchant examines goods. "You abandon your throne, you refuse the hunts, you shelter these fragile things. They call it madness, I call it treason." "Then call it what you wish," Kyle said. "I am no longer king of anything but silence." Dimitri moved closer, and Mara felt the temperature drop. Frost formed on the chapel windows. The candles burned blue, then white. "You think this girl will save you?" Dimitri laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think love will undo what we are? We are monsters, Kyle. We have always been monsters. The only difference between you and me is that I have accepted it, and you are still trying to negotiate with God." "I am not negotiating," Kyle said. "I am simply refusing to destroy what I love." "And that," Dimitri said, "is why you will fall." He reached toward Mara, his hand moving with predatory grace. Kyle intercepted him, and for a moment, the chapel became a place of terrible violence. The 2 vampires moved too fast for mortal eyes to follow, shadows colliding with shadows, the sound of ancient fury dressed in silence. When it was over, Dimitri lay on the chapel floor, his form beginning to dissolve into dust. But not before he spoke one final time, his voice now small with something that might have been respect. "She will leave you, Cale. They always do. The living are not equipped to love the damned forever. One day she will choose sunlight over candles, choose forgetting over knowing, choose death over this." "Then I will have had her for 1 lifetime," Cale said, "and that is enough." Dimitri turned to dust, scattered by wind that came from nowhere. The chapel fell silent. The candles returned to their normal flame, and the frost began to melt. Mara stepped forward, though her legs were trembling. She had witnessed the truth of what Cale was, not the stories, not the mythology, but the reality. A creature of genuine power, genuine danger. A being who could end her with the same thoughtlessness that the soldier had aimed his crossbow. "Was he right?" she asked. "Will I leave you?" Cale turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the kind of honesty that only the immortal can afford. "Yes," he said. "One day you will leave. You will choose the sun, or you will choose death, or you will choose forgetting. That is the mercy of being human, the knowledge that nothing is permanent. And I will stand here in the dark, and I will be grateful that you stayed as long as you did." Mara moved closer. She took his face in her hands, those hands that had held nothing but loss for centuries, and she kissed him. It was not a moment of passion. It was a moment of choosing to stay, at least for now, choosing to believe that love could exist in the space between immortality and death. "I'm not leaving tonight," she said. "I know," Cale replied. "That is enough. That is always enough. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. Chapter 4. The Price of Staying. Winter deepened. Snow fell on the chapel like ash, covering the ruins in white silence. Mara's wound healed completely, the scar fading into something barely visible, a thin line, a whisper of what had been. But other changes were happening, changes that neither she nor Cale had anticipated. Her sleep became erratic. She would wake at odd hours, suddenly aware of sounds no human ear should detect, the heartbeat of a rabbit in the woods, the whispered conversations of monks in the village below, the very pulse of the earth itself. Her thirst, once easily satisfied with bread and water, now demanded something richer. She would watch Cale with a hunger that frightened her. "It's beginning," Cale said one night, watching her grip the edge of the altar, her knuckles white. "What's beginning?" Mara asked, though she already knew. "The transformation. My blood is changing you. Not turning you, not yet, but marking you, preparing you. It happens to those who stay close to us for too long." Mara felt tears slide down her face. Hot tears, the kind only the living can shed. "I don't want to become like you. I didn't ask for this." "I know," Cale said, and his voice carried the weight of 7 centuries of apology. "This is the curse of loving us. We poison everything we touch. Eventually." He led her to a mirror, a full mirror, rare and precious, that he had been keeping in the chapel's deepest room. Mara looked at herself and barely recognized what she saw. Her eyes had begun to change color, shifting from gray to something darker, something hungrier. Her skin had taken on a luminescence that human skin should not possess. She was becoming beautiful in the way that vampires are beautiful, in the way that predators are always beautiful. "How long?" she asked. "Weeks, perhaps. Months, if you're strong. Or if I—" Kyle trailed off. "If you what?" "If I stop letting you drink from me. The more of my blood you consume, the faster the change accelerates. If you stop now, you might remain human. Broken, maybe. Changed, certainly. But still mortal." Mara turned to face him. Her hand reached out and touched the mark on his neck, the scar where he had let her feed, just once, to ease her fever, where she had tasted blood and understood for the first time why immortals spoke of hunger the way poets speak of love. "And if I don't stop," she asked, "then in a few weeks' time, you will feel the sun burn your skin in a way that no human skin can burn. You will move faster than thought. You will discover that the murder of living things becomes as easy as breathing. You will become like me, and you will have all of eternity to regret it." Mara closed her eyes. She thought about the village below, where soldiers still hunted anything they deemed impure. She thought about the sisters who had beaten mercy out of her, about the men who had used her body, about the slow suffocation of being human and powerless. She opened her eyes and met Cale's gaze. "Then let me regret it," she said. "At least I will regret it with teeth." Kyle's silence was absolute. In that silence lived all the weight of his decision 700 years ago, when he too had chosen power over humanity. "You will hate me for this," he said. "Probably," Mara agreed, "but hate, at least, is something. It's proof that I existed, that I mattered enough to be destroyed." That night, Cale opened his wrist and let her drink deeply. Not enough to turn her immediately, but enough to accelerate the process, enough to commit them both to whatever came next. As she drank, Mara felt the change accelerate, her bones shifting, her vision sharpening, her humanity dissolving like salt in water. When it was over, she fell unconscious. She did not wake for 3 days. During those 3 days, Cale sat beside her and remembered. He remembered the girl he had loved 700 years ago. Her name had been Elena, and he had turned her against his maker's wishes. He remembered how she had hated him for it, how that hate had festered into something that eventually became love, and then became the kind of love that can only end in blood. He remembered her final day, how the sun had come too suddenly, and she had chosen to walk into it rather than endure another night of darkness. How her screams had echoed through the stones of a castle that no longer stands. How he had held her ashes in his hands and understood finally that mercy and cruelty are sometimes the same gesture, viewed from different angles. When Mara woke, it was as a vampire. She rose slowly, feeling the weight of the darkness for the first time as something that suited her instead of something that constrained her. She looked at her hands and saw them clearly in light that was not light. She heard her own heartbeat and realized it was impossibly slow, impossibly deep, the heartbeat of something that could no longer die. "Welcome," Cale said, his voice empty of inflection, "to forever." Chapter 5. The Hunt and the Hunted. The first month of Mara's immortality was a blur of hunger and violence. Cale tried to teach her restraint, but restraint is a luxury that only the old can afford. She killed, rabbits at first, then deer, then a hunter who wandered too close to the chapel in the dark. The guilt came after, in waves that threatened to drown her. But beneath the guilt was something else. Power, freedom, the intoxicating knowledge that the weak who had used her were now beneath her, prey instead of predator. "You're reverting," Kyle said, watching her hunt. "I can see it. You're becoming what I became." "No," Mara replied, her mouth still stained with blood. "I'm becoming what I always wanted to be. Someone no one can touch." They fought about it, the first time they had raised voices to each other. Kyle argued for restraint, for control, for the conscious choice not to become the monster that immortality demanded. Mara argued that he had stolen her humanity and now expected her to mourn it. "I offered you a choice," Kyle said. "You offered me a cage," Mara countered. "Just a prettier one than the ones I already knew." But beneath the fighting lived something else, a connection that immortality had deepened rather than severed. They were bound now not by choice, but by blood, by the terrible shared knowledge that they could never be fully separate. Cale could feel her hunger like it was his own. Mara could sense his ancient sorrow like a second heartbeat. It was on the darkest night of winter that the soldiers came. A full contingent, led by the same knight who had shot her months before. Aldrich had returned with reinforcements, with priests, with the authority of the church behind him. They came to burn the chapel and destroy the thing that lived inside it. "Run," Kyle told Mara. "Take the tunnels beneath the chapel. They lead to the forest. Run and don't look back." "No," Mara said. It was the first time she had truly used her new strength. She barricaded the chapel doors with a beam of wood that should have taken 10 men to lift. "We hunt together." They descended on the soldiers like a storm. There was no mercy in it, no restraint. There was only the beautiful, terrible clarity of predators hunting prey. Aldrich lasted the longest. His faith seemed to give him some resistance, or perhaps he simply fought harder. Mara played with him like a cat with a mouse, showing him all the power he had tried to destroy in her human form. "Please," he begged finally, on his knees, his armor torn and his faith shattered. Mara looked at Kyle. In his eyes, she saw 700 years of choices, each one leading to this moment, 2 vampires standing over a dying soldier in a chapel that no longer held God. "Why don't you just end it?" Aldrich asked, his voice breaking. "Why do you torture us?" "Because," Mara said, and her voice was not her own, "we are no longer the ones you made us. We are the things you feared we would become. And unlike you, we have eternity to regret it." She let him live. It was a choice that surprised them both. Mara drank enough to ensure he would not hunt them again, but she left him alive, bleeding, traumatized, but alive. She left him with the knowledge that monsters could choose mercy, and that mercy, sometimes, is the cruelest thing of all. When it was over, Cale held her as she wept, the first tears she had shed since her transformation. "I'm becoming you," she whispered. "No," Kyle said, his voice ancient and tired. "You're becoming yourself, and I am afraid of what that self will demand." Chapter 6. The Mirror of Eternity. 5 years passed. Mara and Kyle learned each other's languages, not just the spoken word, but the language of immortality, the way centuries could be read in a gesture, a scar, a particular quality of silence. They learned which parts of themselves were unchangeable and which parts could be remade through sheer will and repetition. The chapel became less a sanctuary and more a monument to what they had been. The village below grew, and the world changed. Kings died and were replaced by kings. Wars came and went. Technology advanced. And in the ruins above it all, 2 vampires tried to build something that resembled a life. They kept a library of mirrors. In each one, they could see different versions of themselves, reflections of who they might have been if history had bent differently. Sometimes Cale would stand before a particular mirror and see the young king he had been, before blood and hunger had taught him mercy. Sometimes Mara would see the girl she had been, broken, powerless, desperate. One mirror, in particular, showed them something neither had seen before. It was made of black glass, ancient and strangely beautiful. When they looked into it together, it did not show them their current forms. It showed them their futures, or perhaps their pasts. Time had become negotiable for them, less a linear progression and more a space they moved through. In the mirror, Mara saw herself choosing to walk into the sunlight, not out of despair, but out of a calm understanding that even immortality could be exhausted. She saw Cale standing in the chapel alone, once again, but changed, the burden of her absence somehow lighter than the burden of her presence. In the mirror, Cale saw something he had never allowed himself to imagine: redemption. Not forgiveness, that would require agency from others, but redemption in the form of genuine change. The capacity to make different choices than the ones he had made before. "It shows possibilities," Cale said, "not certainties." "Then why does it show that I leave?" Mara asked. Cale's answer was soft, almost gentle. "Because everything leaves eventually. Even eternity dies if you wait long enough for it." They made love that night with the tenderness of creatures who understand that everything beautiful is temporary. Even immortality could not grant them permanence, only the extended loneliness of watching permanence be denied to everything else. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Chapter 7. The Choice. Unmade. 10 years into immortality, Mara found herself pregnant. It was impossible. Vampires cannot bear children. It was one of the first truths Cale had taught her. The capacity for reproduction dies when humanity dies. Yet here she was, her body transforming. Cells dividing in ways that should not be possible. "It's because of how you were turned," Kyle said, his voice hollow with understanding. You were changed too slowly, with too much of my blood spread over months instead of moments. Part of your humanity remained, dormant but present. And apparently, that part is still capable of creating life. Mara looked at her changing body and felt something she had not felt in a decade: hope, also terror, also the sudden crushing weight of decision. What happens if I have it? She asked. I don't know, Kyle said. No vampire has carried a child to term in the recorded history of our kind. It could be human. It could be like us. It could be something we have no language for. They spent months in the chapel debating. The child grew inside her. She could feel it, could sense its own strange hunger that was not quite blood and not quite food. She could feel it reaching toward her from inside, as if trying to become something other than what it was born to be. Mara realized she could end it, a choice that existed for any creature, mortal or immortal. She could choose not to continue, not to bring this unknown thing into a world that had no place for it. I would not judge you, Kyle said one night, his hand on her distended belly. If you chose to end it, I know what it is to create life that becomes suffering. And if I didn't? Mara asked. Then we would have something new, something that might teach us both what we have forgotten about redemption. In her 9th month, Mara gave birth to a daughter. The child emerged not crying, but singing, a sound like wind through empty rooms, like the echo of something that should have died, but chose instead to live. She had Mara's gray eyes and Kyle's terrible beauty. She did not breathe, not exactly, but she moved with purpose and intention. They named her Leora. She was neither vampire nor human, but something that existed in the space between. She did not need blood, but she did not need food either. She grew with impossible speed, 6 months old and already able to speak, to think, to understand concepts that should have taken years to learn. Kyle held her and wept. She is what we might have been, he said, if we had been created with choice instead of hunger, if we had been made for redemption instead of destruction. Mara watched them together, her lover and their daughter, and understood that immortality was not about time. It was about transformation, about the capacity to become something other than what you were born to be. Will she stay? Kyle asked Mara, holding Leora as she reached for the candlelight in fascination. Or will she choose to leave, like all things eventually leave? Does it matter? Mara asked. We have her now, that's enough. But they both knew it would not be enough. That someday, Leora would grow to understand what she was, something that could never fit into the world that Kale and Mara had inherited. Something that might need to create its own world, its own way of being. Chapter 8. The Covenant of Light and Dark. 20 years after Leora's birth, the chapel finally began to fall. Centuries of rot and neglect finally reached a critical point. The roof collapsed during a snowstorm, and the west wall crumbled inward. Kale and Mara watched it happen without moving to stop it. They had outgrown the need for shelter long ago. The chapel had been a refuge, then a prison, then a monument. Now it was simply ruins returning to itself. Leora was fully grown now, a woman of extraordinary power and strange beauty, speaking in languages that had not been heard since the first humans walked the earth. She had asked 2 years prior to leave, to find others like her, to discover if there were more of her kind, or if she was forever alone in her uniqueness. Kyle and Mara had let her go. On the night the chapel truly fell, they stood in the snow and watched it crumble. Mara held Kyle's hand, something she had not done in years, too accustomed to their separateness, their immortal distance. "Will you go into the sun?" she asked him. It was the question she had been avoiding for 2 decades. Kale looked at her. His eyes held centuries of sorrow, but also something new, something that might have been peace. "Not yet," he said, "but someday, perhaps. When I have seen enough. when I have learned that even monsters deserve to rest." They stood in silence as the snow continued to fall, covering the ruins of the chapel in white. In the distance they could hear the village, thriving now, modern, transformed by the same centuries that had left them unchanged. "What do you think she'll find?" Mara asked about Leora. "Out there, in the world?" "A family," Kyle said. "Others like her. She will build something that neither of us could, a bridge between what we are and what humans are. She will be the redemption that we could not find for ourselves." Mara leaned against him. Her body, unchanged for 20 years, felt suddenly fragile. The weight of immortality was becoming heavier, not lighter. She understood now why vampires eventually faded, why they chose the sun, or simply walked into history and forgot themselves. "I might leave soon," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about it." Kyle was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, accepting. "I know," he said. "I've known for years. You are still too much human, even after all this time. You still need endings. And I have learned to live without them." They stood together until dawn threatened on the horizon. As the first light touched the eastern sky, they retreated into what remained of the chapel. In the deepest room, where light could never penetrate, they held each other one last time. Mara placed her hand over Cale's heart. She could feel it beating, impossibly slow, impossibly deep. The heartbeat of something that had learned, finally, after centuries of failure, to love without consuming. "Thank you," she said, "for choosing mercy over hunger that night, for teaching me that monsters can have souls." "Thank you," Kyle replied, "for teaching me that souls matter, that the choice to love is sometimes braver than the choice to destroy." In the darkness, they remained, not speaking, not moving, simply existing in the space they had built together, a space that was neither light nor dark, neither life nor death, but something that lived in the impossible space between. Weeks later, Mara walked into the morning sun. She did not burn as the legend suggested. She simply began to fade, her form becoming transparent, her pain dissolving into nothing. Kyle watched from the chapel window and felt something break inside him, not his heart. That had stopped beating emotionally centuries ago, but something deeper, some core of hope that he had been nursing without admitting it to himself. She faded completely as the sun reached its apex. No screams, no regrets, simply the end of something that could not continue. Kyle remained in the chapel, alone again, but changed. He began to write, first in his own language, then in others. He documented Mara's life, Leora's existence, the strange redemption that had come from the choice to love instead of consume. Centuries passed. The world changed beyond recognition. The chapel remained, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. And in it, Cale waited, not for death, but for understanding. For the knowledge that everything he had suffered, everything he had destroyed, might eventually mean something. Leora returned occasionally, decades between visits, bringing stories of her own kind, of the communities she had built, of the ways she had transformed the boundaries between immortal and mortal. She would find her father in the ruins and sit with him in silence, both of them grieving, both of them grateful. "Will you ever walk into the sun?" Leora asked during one visit. "When I have written enough," Cale replied. "When I have recorded enough of what was, so that it will not be forgotten. Then perhaps I will finally choose to rest." "And do you regret it?" Leora asked. "Loving her?" Cale looked at his daughter, this impossible being that should not exist, this proof that even the damned could create life. "No," he said. "I regret the centuries before I learned how to love. I regret the hunger that consumed me for so long. But I will never regret her. She was the only redemption I ever found that was not earned through suffering." In the ruins of the chapel, where candles no longer burned, where the light of the living world could barely penetrate, Kyle continued to write. And in his writing lived the story of a vampire king who learned too late and just in time that blood need not always mean consumption, that love could exist in the spaces between eternity and ending, that even the damned deserve the chance to choose something other than damnation. The snow fell on the ruins, covering his words in white silence, and somewhere, in that silence, Mara's memory lived on, not as the woman she had been, but as the redemption she had made possible, the love that had saved a creature who had spent 700 years convinced that salvation was impossible. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.